Okay, so I'll just say first slide. So this is the first slide is basically this is an introduction to Miyawaki forests, and I have a little blurb that I like to share. And I can't say enough about how important this project is for our community and for our children. Most of the time, we just feel powerless as we watch the planet get hotter and experience longer and longer fire seasons in California. This is a very specific and progressive way to sink carbon and change the direction of the planet's temperature rise. I'm excited to include this solution in my curriculum this school year and beyond. And my name is Miss Neelam Patil. I am a climate literacy and science teacher in Berkeley, California. I'm also a Miyawaki forest maker and Time Magazine Innovative Teacher of the Year for 2022. So slide 2, next slide. We're going to play a little game of Where is Waldo? So you can see, I already circled it for you, but that's the human. And this is a 45-year-old Miyawaki forest at Yokohama National University. On the upper left, you should see the planting, which was done on these sloped mounds. That was 45 years ago, and this is now the entryway of Yokohama National University. The beautiful thing about these forests is that as wide and as beautiful and big as they look, they're actually not taking up a whole lot of space in this urban area. The footprint is probably 3 meters or 10 feet wide by the length of the walkway. Next slide. So Green Pocket Forests is the nonprofit which I founded to green urban spaces using the Miyawaki method. And let's learn a little bit about those. Next slide. Miyawaki forests grow 10 times faster. They generate 20 to 100 times more biodiversity. They're 30 times more dense, meaning they're 3 to 5 native species per square meter. You can store 30 to 100 times more carbon dioxide. And there's a lot of studies about this that have been done in Japan and India, not yet in the US, but they do sequester carbon. Just use common sense to look at how much biomass they generate. They also conserve water. They're self-sufficient after 18 months to 3 years. They lower the temperature and heal the soil biology. Next slide. Here is the difference between a monoculture forest, which is some of the traditional forestry methods. It's the same species and it's every 8 to 15 feet. And then you can see the difference with the Miyawaki forest. It's lots of varied species and multiple layers of the forest. Next slide. Here are the layers of a Miyawaki forest. Actually, the beautiful thing about this forest is they originated in the Shinto shrines of Japan, where the developers didn't dare cut down the trees because they were scared to. So those were the only left areas that were untouched and had a lot of old growth forests. And so Dr. Miyawaki started studying them and mimicking that methodology. Next slide. So here you can see an overview of the urban heat island effect and how a Miyawaki forest can mitigate that. So the green shape is where they planted a Miyawaki forest. On the outside, it's 50 degrees Celsius. Inside, it's 26 degrees. That translates to 112 degrees to and outside, and around 80 degrees inside. And then you can see the band as it keeps going. Next slide. Here is an interesting experiment that was done where they had a control group, which was the traditional planting of the same species 15 feet apart. And on the opposite side is the Miyawaki method. Both of these are 18-month-old plantings. And you can see for yourself the difference in the growth. Next slide. Here is Dr. Akira Miyawaki. He pioneered the Miyawaki method and planted thousands of these forests around the world, always involving children in the process. Next slide. So I have a question. How do Miyawaki forests work if they use all Japanese plants? it's a trick question. We get this a lot. Well, how will it work if you're using Japanese plants? We're only using the native plants from that region. It is an application and a technique that can be utilized around the world and all over the United States. Next slide. So we're going to go right into Berkeley. The next slide, you should see Cragmont, Miyawaki Forest site selection. So this is the site that we chose. It was kind of barren ground, which nobody cared about, and the kids ran over. And next slide, you can see the planting day, how that space has been completely transformed. And these are first graders who are now third graders who planted the forest, and they themselves helped plant the forest. Next slide. Now you can see it after 11 months. And these are fourth graders who kind of watched the forest grow, and they were just, their minds were blown. Next slide. This is a lawn remediation project, which was, we basically took a lawn that was using 13,000 gallons of water a month and transformed it into a Miyawaki forest. And this is 18 months old, and we're using only a fraction of the water that we were using before. Next slide. So now we're going to transition to talk about climate literacy and resilience education. Next slide. So there's a lot of STEM and climate literacy learning opportunities. The students can gather scientific data. They get, I loved the presentation that Sharon and Green Schoolyards of America did before. I love how you kind of set the stage for this work, because we're actually doing that work and exposing these kids to nature every day. There's also getting the cultural, social, and medicinal significance of the native plants, connecting with local indigenous tribal leaders and learning the values of land stewardship, and also getting to do youth advocacy for climate action. So let's go to the next slide. Here you can see that our students are planting the forest themselves, and we invited local tribal leaders to do a land declaration and to bless the planting, and also share information about their own values around these native indigenous plants, which is very important to do. Next slide. And here you can see the students got really activated. One thing I want to just share is that I feel like, as much as we want to green schoolyards, the children and connecting with them about this message is so important, because they are so concerned themselves about the planet, and they're really watching and wishing that more bold and ambitious action would be taken. And you can see on the right that there are some students gathering some scientific data around the growth of the forest. So now we're going to go right into how to plant a forest. So we can go to the next slide. How to plant a Miyawaki forest. And next slide. So first, you can see this picture. It holds all of the pieces of the community partnership that we built together. There is the school principal, there's the buildings and grounds department of the school district, there are local community leaders, there are funders, there are parents, there are tribal leaders, and members of local indigenous tribes, and also buildings and grounds staff members. So that it really took a village to create this, and once it was planted, it was really a transformative experience. You really do need to start by educating the stakeholders, and you want to form partnerships to acquire planting permission, funding, and volunteers. Next slide. So once you've gotten that groundwork laid down, you can identify a site, and you would want to survey the soil and plan for soil amendments based on whether your soil is well draining, or if it does not, whether it's clay or sand, you would want to amend accordingly. And then you could Survey an old growth forest nearby with indigenous plants to determine your area's potential natural vegetation. Now, what is potential natural vegetation? It's what would exist if human intervention had not existed, had not taken place. And then you would create a plant list, and you would include late successional canopy trees, understory, and shrubs in this plant list. And you would also mimic your, you would basically use what you found in the local site survey to inform your plant list. Then once you've created your plant list, next slide, go to soil preparation. So once you've created your plant list, then you're going to prepare the soil. You would aerate by digging to 12 to 18 inches. In Japan, I just went to Japan myself to study the Miyawaki method directly from the source. They dig to 1 meter, which is, I think 36 inches deep. So I'm kind of being easy on you guys by saying, let's do 12 to 18 inches. It works well in the US that way. You can amend with compost, mulch, or other porous materials as available. Some people use rice husks or coconut coir. Then you could also even make your own compost with school food waste. So that's something that I've seen some of my colleagues in Australia are doing. They're just building a temporary compost bin and using all the school food waste to then add to the Miyawaki forest. Next slide. So then you're going to organize a planting day. And as you saw in the previous slide, we would invite tribal leaders. These tribal leaders were able to come. They were able to come on one of the days, but another planting day they were not able to. But they did send a land declaration. And so I had my students actually read the land declaration, and it was really, really a very special moment. And the beautiful thing that I just remember the most was my students, I had told them about how the indigenous tribal leaders or indigenous tribes regard trees as their family, like their own brothers and sisters. And so my students said, well, we're getting new family members, we're getting new brothers and sisters today. And that's how they felt about this tree planting. And as you can see, they're planting some trees. I've also had students sing happy birthday to their trees and give them names. And the density is 3 per square meter. Next slide. Then you would want to mulch the forest immediately. This would protect from weeds and support the soil biology. You would water every 10 days until it is 18 months old, and then gradually start to wean the forest off the water. The watering proportions would depend on the annual rainfall in your climate zone, and so you would measure accordingly. Next slide. So these are the costs involved, and I know a lot of people ask, well, how much did it cost? It's going to be different in every area, and depending on the labor that you have available. So, but these are the categories of your budget. So I can at least share that. So sheet mulching or blacktop removal. So if you have a lawn that you want to remediate, or you need to take out blacktop, those are going to go into your budget. Then you're going to have to do some soil preparation and amendments, and that can be done with volunteers. I have done this with volunteers where they just literally take pickaxes and they dig to 12 inches deep, and then we mix in the amendments together. Maybe some high school students could do this as a class project, or middle school students. I could see that happening, over a few class periods, and could be very successful. Or you would have a landscape contractor do that and do it professionally. So that's going to impact your budget. Then there's indigenous local potted saplings. And again, that's the cost is going to vary based on your sources, whether you have access to a nursery, whether you have your own nursery, whether you grow your own potted saplings from seed. And then you want to install a temporary irrigation system, and you want fencing because people will be people, humans will be humans, and they could run around or run through the forest and trample. This happens because it's so dense. The plants could get easily trampled. So we definitely do want a fence. And if you have a deer issue, you definitely want a fence around it. So that's going to impact your budget. And then also you want to definitely train if you're doing this in a school, you want to train the teachers, or whether you're doing it at a city park, you want to train the staff or the community engagement people, because they are going to want to continue engaging the community around this. This is a very community focused, community centric project, and it takes the community to continue with the maintenance. And so we'll go into the maintenance question that a lot of people come into. And there's also a STEM curriculum training, which would be really exciting for teachers to incorporate in their schools. Next slide, to maintenance and safety. So a lot of questions come up about maintenance. This is a no to low maintenance. So it is, the limiting factor is the budget. The cost is high initially. They did do a study in Japan where they studied over 10 years, the impact of the Miyawaki method. And they found that the cost was actually less over time because there's an initial investment. However, once after that 18 months initial period, it's very low maintenance. The forest that I showed you that was the lawn remediation, we've weeded it maybe 3 or 4 times, and we've had big community weeding parties with 20 or 30 families who've been really happy to come out. And after that, it became really self-sustaining. Then the water investment, again, it's a temporary irrigation installation, or you could hand water if you have someone who's available, like if you're doing it at a church or a volunteer-based place. You could have someone come every week and just water it and tell them how long you want them to water it. And that, again, is part of the community engagement. You want to get those people engaged, educated, so that they're excited about helping out. A lot of people are concerned about line of sight and vandalism. What if people go sneak in the forest and do bad things? So I do suggest having a mesh fence around it, which can keep the forest safe and regulate the visits through a Miyawaki Forest Champion. Now, if you want to do it in a school where there's a huge schoolyard, you could do this on the edges of the schoolyard. And also we've kind of coined this new thing called polka dot method. So you would create like large sort of circle, 8-foot diameter circles, sort of similar to what Sharon was talking about, but using the Miyawaki method so you can accelerate the growth of the canopy trees. And you could kind of dot those around the schoolyard. Okay, next slide. So just here's a review of a comparison of traditional forestry versus the Miyawaki method. The density is for traditional forestry is around 0.3 per square meter, or 1 tree every 15 feet. And for Miyawaki, it's 3 per square meter, or 1 tree sapling for every 18 inches. The species, it could be variable in traditional. It could be monoculture, hybrid, or mixed with local natives. Miyawaki, it's all indigenous and a very diverse selection. It's always that way. Soil preparation, you would dig at the site of planting and fertilize, whereas the Miyawaki method, you would dig the entire site to 12 to 18 inches to aerate the soil and amend. All right, and last slide is my contact information. So that's it. Hopefully you heard me and saw the whole thing.